Have you ever wanted to try something new, develop a new skill, a new practice, but you just couldn't get yourself to do it? It's like there's too much friction, something in the way. Or maybe you try a time or three, but then you fall off, you quit, you give up. How do you change this? What do you do to develop the consistency you need to see success? That is what we're unpacking today. We're in pursuit of anti-fragility. How do you not just bounce back from stress or strain, but get better because of it? How do you use challenge, difficulty, even friction to become a better, stronger version of yourself? And we were looking at this during office hours and unpacking practices for anti-fragility, meditation in particular, and many students said, I just can't get myself to do it. There's too much friction, or I try and I fall off. I can never have the consistency I want and need. And that took us into a conversation about Mount Stupid, stages of competency, how to rebrand meditation for momentum. We're also going to look at the other practices because they help build what we need to stick with something like meditation. And those other practices include journaling and reflection and willpower practices that build up your inner listening versus require you to shut down or numb out. So let's dive in. Quick refresher on anti-fragile. This is a term developed by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. The idea came from his work in risk management, his observation of financial markets, biological ecosystems, and tech innovation. So it's not something that comes from the personal development landscape. It's bigger than that, broader than that, has that golden thread of truth. Taleb noticed that while some things break down, they're fragile, other things endure, they're robust, some things bounce back, they're resilient, but other things evolve in response to stress, strain, challenge, even chaos. And we want to become individuals who can evolve in response to stress, strain, and challenge. And we can train for that. And that's what these practices are all about. So anti-fragile practices, when I look at what really moves the needle for me, it's these three: meditation, journaling and reflection, and willpower practices where you're adding hormetic stress and asking the body and mind to adapt. So meditation works for building anti-fragility because it develops the prefrontal cortex. That's like the forehead region of the brain responsible for rational thinking, creative thinking, problem solving, planning. It's what helps your rational brain stay online during times of stress when the limbic system wants to take over and you're in that primitive knee-jerk reaction state of mind and being. Now, meditation does something else that's really interesting. It strengthens your connection to your parasympathetic nervous system and the ventral vagal pathway. The ventral vagal pathway is that state of safety, openness, receptivity. And that's exactly what you need during times of stress, strain, and challenge. You want to be receptive, open. You can see the bigger picture. So you see more routes, more solutions. There's pattern recognition. And meditation is an opportunity to develop your relationship to that neural pathway when you're not under stress and strain. So again, it's like training, not just the area of your brain, but your nervous system too. Now, journaling and reflection is like a mirror. It allows you to measure backwards, notice patterns, narratives, neural addictions that are often below the surface of your conscious thought. And recognizing these will allow you to move forward, especially during times of difficulty, and also measure gains versus just see the gap. We'll get to that in a moment. Hormetic practices are willpower practices. It's where you're sensing and operating within a sweet spot of stress in order to strengthen body, mind, and spirit. We'll talk about each of these three practices individually, but first, let's look a little more closely at hormetic stress and willpower, because all of these practices will require discipline, perseverance, leaning into the friction and resistance. And hormesis is from the Greek word to excite or to set in motion. And I encourage you to look at these challenges, resistance and friction and practices as exciting, as something you can lean into, and they're going to set this building of your will and your inner strength in motion. And with hormesis, you want to get into a sweet spot of stress where your body, mind, and nervous system is challenged without being overwhelmed, when you can rise to the occasion versus being broken down. When stress is in the right dose, your body will build itself up. Your mind and nervous system will become stronger versus weakened or diminished by what you're doing. So let's apply this to meditation. Meditation has far-reaching benefits. There's endless science, data, studies, and statistics on how it can completely transform your body, your mind, and your nervous system. So why doesn't everyone do it? Why don't you do it? Why do most people find it tremendously difficult and say, even though they know they would benefit from it, they can't quite make themselves get on board with it? And I think there are many reasons. One is poor translations of meditation and unrealistic expectations. So poor translations, we got taught that meditation was quieting the mind. Unrealistic expectations. You go in there thinking you can quiet the mind. You recognize that the mind is going absolutely haywire. And so you're like, I'm not good at this. I can't do this. And I give up, or I'm not even going to try. And that's how you end up on the wrong side of Mount Stupid. But before we get to that, let's look at the 4 stages of competence. And this applies across all arenas of life, but we're going to use driving and meditation as metaphors so we really understand it. So the 4 stages of competence are unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence. Unconscious incompetence. So unconscious incompetence is when you don't have the skill and you don't recognize the deficit. You may even deny the usefulness of the new skill. In order to move forward, you have to recognize both your incompetence and the value of the new skill. So for example, with driving, before you know how to drive, you don't have the skill and you don't actually recognize the deficit. People just drive you around. And to learn how to drive, you have to recognize that you don't know, and then also the value of the skill. So a teenager gets very eager to be able to drive themselves around, do the things they want to do, have that freedom, and so they move on to the next stage. Let's look at meditation. You don't have the skill and you might not recognize the deficit. You don't know what you're missing out on, what a mind and a nervous system would be like with meditation. So you may deny the usefulness of the skill. I don't see how it would benefit me. I don't get it. I don't like it. I don't see how that could be enjoyable or useful. And in order to actually learn to develop that practice and that skill, you have to recognize your incompetence. I don't know how to do this, and the value of the skill. I want to do this. I want to have that type of mind. I want to build more prefrontal cortex. I want to have a stronger relationship to the ventral vagal pathway in my nervous system. I want to be able to maintain more cool and calm even when under stress and strain. And only when you step into that incompetence and the desire to develop the new skill will you move on to what is known as conscious incompetence. Now, this is by far the most challenging stage because you can see the lack of your skill, the value of the skill or practice is understood, and the path is clear. But moving forward is humbling, frustrating. You're confronted with all your own limitations. So it's tempting to turn back, deny the value, or just quit. So for example, driving. You know you don't know how to drive. You want to drive. You start learning how to drive, and it's humbling and it's frustrating and embarrassing and all the things. But again, the desire to drive and have that freedom will keep you moving forward. With something like meditation, that drive has to really be there because it's not as valuable to your daily life, especially if you haven't had the experience of living from a more spacious mind. So you see the lack. I don't have the skill. I still value the skill. I know I have to move forward consistently to develop the skill, but this is humbling. It is frustrating, and I'm going to be tempted to turn back and quit. I may even start to deny the value of the skill because it's bringing up so much internally. And I'm sure you can see how this applies to many changes people want to make, whether it's exercise, eating well, getting training for a new job or a new position. It's endless where and how this applies. So again, we're using driving and meditation, but keep stretching this so it really serves you. Now, when you're willing to move forward from conscious incompetence, you eventually get to conscious competence. This is when skills are being gained, often in very focused formats and with deliberate steps. You have to maintain concentration to do the thing. And then if practice or focus is broken, you can slip back into incompetence. So for example, you're learning to drive, you have to remember all the things, turn on the blinker, do this, do that. You have to concentrate and really focus. And if you're not, you can easily slip into incompetence, hence all the accidents with teenagers, right? Similar with meditation. You start to gain some skill. You have to focus, you have to do all the things, you find your mind is going everywhere, you have to concentrate, or you can get frustrated and slip back into incompetence again. So once you move through this, if you can persevere, you eventually get to unconscious competence. And this is when you've done enough practice, enough repetition, that the skill, the practice, the thing you're doing or learning becomes second nature. It no longer requires focus, concentration, or steps. For example, we now get in the car and just drive. I just sit on my meditation cushion and whatever happens, happens. So the new thing has become wired into the brain and the body. Very powerful. And we all want to get there, but often we're not aware of the process and what it's going to take to get us from that desire to have the new skill to actually having the new skill wired in the brain and the body. And this is further compounded by something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is the cornerstone study on self-evaluation. And what they found is that the bottom 25% of performers dramatically overestimated their abilities, often believing they were above average. High performers, on the other hand, underestimated their competence because they assumed that others found the task as easy as they did. So underperformers tend to overestimate their abilities. High performers tend to undervalue or underestimate their abilities. This is also something called the illusory superiority or the better than average effect. And a classic example of this is people were asked to rate their driving skills, and over 80% rated themselves as above average. And this cognitive bias tends to show up across the board with leaderships, ethics, intelligence, even attractiveness. And what's happening is that we anchor to our intentions, our desire to do well, and highlight our successes while minimizing or rationalizing when we fall short or fail. But we do the inverse to others. We judge them based on outcomes or mistakes. So there's a lot happening inside of us when we're embarking on something new. In fact, there's something that's called the double burden. This is a quote from the Dunning-Kruger effect. If you're incompetent, you can't know you're incompetent. Not only do you lack the skill, but you lack the experience and knowledge to recognize you don't have the skill or where you're at with the skill. Another quote, the miscalibration of the incompetent stems from an error about the self. The miscalibration of the highly competent stems from an error about others. So this all ties in to something called Mount Stupid, which is a really interesting model. And basically, when we're starting something new, we lack perspective. We're unable to evaluate our performance, our skill, and our knowledge. This leads to cognitive blind spots. We don't have enough experience or knowledge to know what we're missing. And then also perception gaps. Experts are more aware of the complexity, the difficulty, the path, and the process. And experts or masters tend to be more humble, whereas novices or beginners don't know what they don't know, and it leads to a false sense of confidence. Hence, Mount Stupid. At the beginning of something, you often have high confidence. You're like, I can do this, I can take this on, I just need to sit in meditation, no big deal. But then once you do it and you recognize your own incompetence, you fall into the valley of despair. This is harder than I imagined. I'm not good at this. I have a long way to go. This is when we start seeing things in the gap. We start measuring ourselves by how far we have to go, how long it's going to take there, all the ways we're falling short, all the things we're missing, versus measuring in the gain, how far we've come, what we're learning, how we're growing, how we're changing. And that is the way to build anti-fragility, to become stronger inside and out. It's also, it allows you to persevere once you fall off that cliff of Mount Stupid into the valley of despair, and then it starts to trend upward in the slope of enlightenment. As you learn and grow going up the slope of enlightenment, eventually it tapers off and you're on the plateau of sustainability until you decide to take on another mountain. So this visualization, this model allows you to embrace and persevere when those difficulties inevitably arise as you approach some new challenge, endeavor, build new skill, want to take on a new practice or discipline. So in the valley of despair is actually where we're learning, growing, evolving, developing anti-fragility. You have to embrace the suck, as David Goggins would say, and this is where journaling and reflection can totally transform your experience. It's a way to mark the gains, to see how far you've come. It'll also allow you to reflect and review so you're aware of some of the struggles, the narratives, the neural addictions you're going through. And again, the journaling is therapeutic. The review is where the revelations will occur. My therapist had me get in the habit of journaling every night and then reviewing once a week. It is very difficult. That review can be painful, but again, it's enlightening because I will not see some of these patterns, habits, narratives unless I'm doing that review and reflection. Some of my favorite journaling prompts: what am I noticing? What am I seeing? What's coming up? What are my gains? How am I growing? How am I improving? How am I moving forward? And then this one is a paraphrase of a Viktor Frankl quote: if I were living this day for the second time, what would I do differently? And this allows me to kind of look forward, know where I'm likely to fall short, and prepare for that. All of these practices, any change you want to make, new endeavor you want to take on, dream you want to realize, will require a strong will. So developing your will to persevere when you fall off the cliff of Mount Stupid, you need to travel through the valley of despair, and the slope of enlightenment seems far, far away, is essential. And there's something in the brain called the anterior midcingulate cortex. Scientists are describing it as the seat of will. It seems to get larger when we do things we don't want to do. So again, it's like we have to embrace the suck. We have to know that moving through, doing the thing, has its own value. And it's in developing this region of the brain. And this region of the brain sits in between the prefrontal cortex, that rational, logical decision-making and planning center of the brain, and the limbic system, the emotional center of the brain. And the limbic system is what tends to hijack you when you're overstimulated, you're triggered, too much stress, too much strain, too much challenge, too much friction. So it's like if we have a bigger bridge, if this structure of the anterior midcingulate cortex is larger, it's like we can keep the prefrontal cortex online and keep moving through, especially when we encounter the things we don't want to do. Remember that the right dose is the key to staying in the game, and consistency will always outperform intensity. And even intensity has its own kind of emotional response. That's not long enough. That's not good enough. This and that. And that's often what drives us to do things in a way that's so intense we can't come back to them. So restrain that aspect of yourself. That's a prefrontal cortex moment. And do enough. Do what you can to stay in the game and return to it the next day. This also ties into hustle and grind versus ease and grace. We tend to get messages that you do one or you do the other, but the truth is it's both. It's always both. And that asks you to develop your inner awareness and have a high level of discernment. When developing your will and looking for those sweet spots of stress, you need a high level of inner awareness. And one of the best models I've ever gotten for this is from a Huberman Lab episode where he was talking about deliberate cold exposure. And typically when people are doing deliberate cold exposure, they're going for a colder temperature or a longer time, but those are based on external standards. And the only way to get better is colder or longer. Instead, Huberman recommended that you get over 3 walls, 3 hurdles, 3 moments where you're like, I don't want to do this. And then it's like you're flexing that anterior midcingulate cortex each time. But again, the benefit here is, yes, that flex of the mind muscle, but also you are responding to what's going on inside of you rather than shutting down or numbing out. And the challenge is not externally driven, but internally motivated. You're listening and discerning and responding and flexing that muscle. And that is very, very powerful, not just for the practice you're doing, but for all arenas of life. Let's wrap up. What does this mean for practice? When you understand the stages of competency, when you know the cycle of being at the peak of Mount Stupid, I can do this, I've got this, then dropping down into the valley of despair and having to travel through that valley up the slope of enlightenment before you get to the plateau of sustainability, you're more likely to stick with the process and you're more likely to accomplish your goals, realize your dream, pick up that new practice or skill. And you also know that discipline is essential for moving through that conscious incompetence, that frustration and irritation in the valley of despair. And you also know that when you're taking each and every step, you are flexing that part of your brain, the anterior midcingulate cortex. It is getting stronger and building a better connection between your rational thinking brain and your emotional response center. You also know that true confidence is humble and generous because you've made that journey, and that you will hit this cycle every time you take on a new mountain. So you can predict it, you can respond to it with more ease and grace, and also with practices like meditation, journaling, and reflection. You take on more hormetic stress because you know it will make you better, it will make you anti-fragile.